What is inclusive design, and how can you embrace it and practice it in your UX or UI design work? By the end of this video, you'll understand the basics of inclusive design and how to implement it in your design work. This video is a snippet taken from one of our recent live events, where Vale Querini, a CareerFoundry mentor, details some of the fundamentals of inclusive design. If you're interested in more events like this, check out our events page. The link is in the description below. And if you think UX or UI design might be for you, check out our short courses. The links for these are also in the description. Now let's dive in and start learning about inclusive design.
And today I will talk about a topic that is very close to my heart. And it's also one of the reasons why I like my job. I like to do what I do. And I will try to give you an introduction to inclusive design. I will talk to you about what the role of the UX designer is when it comes to building inclusive products. And we will touch some very important concepts like working in teams, because you're never working alone as a UX designer. We'll briefly mention unconscious bias, which is a really important concept to get from the start. And I will show you some best practices. So we will not be able, with the time and space that we have today, to really go in depth into all of the subtopics, but hopefully by the end of today, you will have an idea of what inclusive design is really about, and you will be inspired to learn more and maybe even bring it into your own design practice, into your own projects. And to define inclusive design, I like to think of it as a mindset. So more like an approach and a series of practices rather than a process. Because when you're doing inclusive design, it's not like you're using a different design process. It's still the UX design process, still the design thinking process that you're using. You simply bring to it this dimension of inclusion, which is all about thinking about those groups of users that might be excluded, either because they're part of a minority, so they're part of a smaller group compared to the rest of your user base, of the users that you actually want to reach to, or because they are an oppressed group in society. What does that mean? That means that we take into consideration people that have disabilities, for example, and there is the whole field of accessibility that I will tell you more about later. But we also take into consideration all of those other dimensions that make up our identities. So whether that is gender, socioeconomic status, religion, cultural background, language, sexual orientation, age, ethnicity, you name it. And to me, you cannot call your design inclusive if you're not really aware of all of these aspects of people identities, because we do move through the world and we do interact with digital and non-digital product based on how our identity actually influences the way that we cannot interact with the world around us. And of course, like depending on how we identify and depending on specific conditions that are only personal to us, we can sometimes have an advantage in society and therefore also in the use of products, or we can sometimes be disadvantaged. We can be discriminated against. To give you like just a very personal example, and maybe you can do the same reflection for yourself. I'm a white middle-class person, which means that because of these aspects of my identity, I actually benefit of privilege that the society in which I live assigns to people with this characteristic. But at the same time, I'm also a queer, non-binary individual, and because of these other aspects of my identity, I actually experience discrimination and find myself in a position of disadvantage while having some experiences. And what happens when we don't take into consideration the complexity of humans, really, is that we might leave people out, and we might end up actually serving them experiences that are less than good. These can be experiences that exclude by denying access, by disempowering people, by causing different levels of frustration, from a little bit of something that is just a bother to really huge struggles. We can expose people to a situation they don't want to be in. We can expose their sensitive data. We can be less than careful and ethical with their privacy, for example. And we can, with the products we shape, end up reinforcing stereotypes that exist in society. So our job is it's a very important one. In a way, it's one that has a huge impact on society. And you might think that finding yourself in this position of responsibility can be uncomfortable, and it is, and it should be. You should be aware that you have this responsibility when you make design choices. But it's also, to me personally, a very good reason to do what I do. I think that there is a lot of opportunity in the field of product design and digital design and user experience design to do work that has a purpose, to do work that is good work, does something good for the world around us, gives us the opportunity to shape the world that we would like to see. And before we get into the examples that I prepared for you and that I would like to discuss with you, I would like to just say that there are a few ingredients that are key to inclusive design that really enable us to ideate and deliver inclusive solutions. And these are working with the right team, involving users, and then establishing and follow, of course, and put into practice design guidelines that are inclusive, that embed inclusion into them. Teams are important because we work in teams. Every company, every organization has a team made up of people with different expertise. So if you are a designer, or if you want to become one, you can expect to work with people that are expert in product strategy, developers, engineers, people from marketing, from sales, etc. And we collaborate. We are not just by ourselves doing our design work. And having the right team is extremely important, because if you have, let's say, a quite broad set of identities embedded in those teams, then you have an advantage when it comes to spotting each other bias and inclusion habits. And the bias is basically just a tendency that we all have as humans to just read the world around us based on the lenses of our own experiences. So we might very easily, even with the best of intention, make the mistake of assuming that others think and feel how we do, that they want what we want. And having people working next to us, working together with us towards the same goal, can help us basically like reduce, or at least spot and be aware of these cognitive mistakes that we make at the end. So if you are looking for a job in design, I do advise you to make sure that you understand not just what the company can offer you in terms of like what kind of products they make, what kind of industry they're in, but also what kind of culture they have, what kind of people they hire, and how do they allow for those people to bring their best contributions to the table. And second, very important ingredient for inclusive design, it's involving users. In user experience design, users are the center of everything. Everything we do should revolve around their needs and their wishes and their pains. It's all about solving those pains and offering value to them. So involving user is a must for every user experience designer. And it's even more important to involve the right users when we want to design something for communities that are often excluded, especially if we don't have representatives of those community within our team, or we're not ourselves part of those communities. How do we involve them? We can do so through user research, which is the practice of getting to know the users and understanding them, empathizing with them, by doing things like conducting user interviews, testing prototypes with them, for examples, doing surveys, going out in the field and observing how they go about their life and how they try to solve the problems that we want to help them solve, for example, and also co-creation methods. So for example, co-creation workshops where designers work next to users and basically invite them into the process and help them teach us actually what works for them and what doesn't. Now, let's look at some best practices that we can refer to when we are going about our design projects, and then can inspire us to think about all of the very important elements to keep in mind when we want to design for inclusion. The first best practice is that of embracing accessibility and accessibility standards. So accessibility, for those who might not have heard of it yet, is the practice of making websites, application usable for as many people as possible, and especially for people that have some kind of impairment, whether that is a physical impairment, like vision impairment, hearing loss, mobility, for example, or a cognitive one. Inattention, also anxiety. There are a variety of disabilities that are permanent disabilities, but there are also states of temporary impairment that we can consider also with the intent of actually making things better in the end for everyone, and not only those specific users who have a disability. And there are guidelines out there that you can simply learn and embrace, so you don't have to figure out how to best serve certain needs all by yourself from scratch. One that I suggest that you check out if you're interested in the topic are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG for friends. You can find them on this website, w3.org/WAI, Web Accessibility Initiative is the name of the initiative. And they're quite extensive, so there's a lot of content in there, but they really cover a lot of very important points and really help you make your designs more accessible, at least up to a certain level. To give you an example of what kind of things these guidelines prescribe, I have here one of them. This guideline says, don't use color alone to convey information. Now, with visual design, we use color not just to make things pretty, not just for aesthetic reason, but we use color as a mean to convey information. So it's functional. Color is functional for a visual designer. And in the image, you see what Trello, which is a list-making application, does with color to convey information. They use color to label different pieces of content so that you as a user can decide the content that belongs together is green, for example, and another type of content is red. And this works fine for me, for example. That's sufficient information for me to see if my lists and the content in those lists is marked in a certain way. But this might not be enough for somebody who's colorblind. So there you need to introduce another tool to convey the same information. And what Trello did is that introduced what they call the colorblind friendly mode, which adds patterns to the labels. So you don't rely anymore only on color. You don't rely on color. You rely on pattern and the contrast in those patterns instead. And I think this is also an example to show how inclusive design is not necessarily always about making one thing that works for everyone, like one same thing that can be used in the same way for everyone, but it's more about finding sometimes different ways to still give the same experience, to still bring the same values that you want to bring to all the users that you want to reach. Another best practice is that of using inclusive imagery. Imagery is basically pictures, illustrations, icons, emojis. And using inclusive imagery means using imagery where people can see themselves in. They can recognize themselves depicted in those pictures and illustrations. They can feel seen, welcome, invited. And this is good because that will make users more likely to try your product, for example, or to stick with you, or to have just a more fulfilling experience of your product, of your brand. And this is true for in-product imagery. So actually what you see within your website or your application, but it's also true for marketing content, for example, for advertising, social media content, etc. One way that you can make people feel represented in images is that of diversifying the humans that you are depicting in there. Like in the example here, you can see in this illustration, we see a group of people and they have different characteristics. They have different skin colors, different bodies. Some of them have more feminine traits, and some of them we can read more masculine traits. They wear different clothes. So this diversity actually allows different people to see themselves somehow in that image, in that picture of a community. Same here goes for this other image that I found on Instacart. And another strategy is that of not diversifying the humans that you depict, but actually abstracting. And this works very well where you're not trying to show a picture of a group of people, but when you're actually trying to show the picture of or representing visually the user that is actually interacting with your product at that very moment, or somebody that they actually know, so an actual person. In the example here, There is a screenshot that I took while I was signing up for my liability insurance. During the sign-up process, they asked me who else lives with me, because they need to know if the insurance has to cover someone else besides myself. And I really like how they did it, because the options that I'm given, they are, described by words. You have, for example, it's just me, or my partner also lives with me, or partner and kids, for example. And this option is also supported visually by icons. They make it more prominent and clear what each option is for, what it's about. And those icons are not people. They didn't draw people there. They are objects, they are toothbrushes. And I find this a quite nice, delightful, elegant solution, because a toothbrush does not have a gender. A toothbrush does not have a skin color. A toothbrush has no defined level of ability. So I can see myself in there. I can see my partner in there. And I think that pretty much everybody will have no issue with an object like that uses an abstraction to represent themselves and their family. Just one more example, still of this strategy of abstracting. Here we have two examples, one good and one not so good, of profile or placeholder images for user profiles. On the left side, we see that this application, which is an application for stock trading, which I actually downloaded because I wanted to learn about it, because I don't know that much about it. And one day I thought it was time for me to understand how that works. And this application assigns to you this placeholder image when you first create an account. Now, this is an illustration. This is not a picture of someone else, but still it's an illustration that has certain characteristic, and namely a beard, glasses, a certain haircut, that make me think about a certain category in a certain group of people, a certain, defined category of people in society. And that happens to be a community that I am not part of. I'm not part of that group. What I see here is probably young, probably white dude, and I do not identify as such. So I felt a little bit confused and mildly frustrated by the fact that those who built this application thought I might find myself reflected in an image. And I don't know why they did it. To be honest, I don't think that they intentionally wanted to say, hey, if you are not a dude, you're not welcome to learn about stock trading with us. I don't think that was their intention. I'm more likely to think that they just didn't put any thought into this. So they either just idealized their persona, their ideal user, without actually doing the research and finding out that there are a variety of people who could be interested in that product. Or they just were sitting in an office where everybody looked like that, and therefore they assume that the rest of the world looks like that. What I would suggest is, if you ever have to draw an illustration or an icon to use as a placeholder for a user profile, is to go for something a little bit more abstract. Here on the right side of my slide, we can see what CareerFoundry actually does. This is super, super abstract. It is vaguely recognizable as a human figure, but there is no detail here that can point to any specific identity aspect of this user. So there would be a lot more examples with images, but and I want to go on and say a few words about words, actually. So best practice is to use inclusive language, which is like most obviously, it's not using language that is either racist or sexist or that has negative connotations. But it's also about keeping things simple. So using simple words and using shorter sentences. Because although you might have a certain fluency in the language of the interface that you're designing, you have to think that there are people out there who might either have might struggle keeping the attention while reading a long paragraph of text or very long sentences. And there are people who might not be as fluent in that language that you're using for your interface, and they might therefore have troubles understanding complicated words. In the example, it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I hope that serves to understand how it's sometimes very unnecessary to use certain words or certain constructs when the language offers us a much simpler alternative to that. Maybe one real example that I can mention from one project that I was working on is that of a buy button. So we were, with the team that I was working with, we were designing a ticketing flow for a German mobility application. And then at some point, like without thinking, like we made that buy button and we actually labeled it purchase. And then, I don't know, like we were looking back and like, okay, like why are we saying purchase? That's a more complicated word than buy. Like buy, it's a very common word in the English language. It's short. It's seen everywhere. Like there is no good reason to be more fancy using another term. So we switched and went with buy. And as far as I know, nobody's ever had a problem with that. So nobody has ever been unsure about what a button that says buy actually means. One important touch points to think about, or where you have to think about language, is forms. So forms are meant for data collection, which means that is about asking users to give us data, to give us information that it's often personal and that can be very sensitive. And here language can really make all the difference. Because if you're asking about something personal, the words that you use to ask the question matter, the words that you use to explain eventually, but it's also about the options that you give users. So once you ask the question, you give them a set of options, and it's important that in those words, people can find themselves. In the example I have Facebook actually, which is not, to me personally, the greatest product out there, but it is a product that is doing the gender question quite well in my own personal experience, because they do ask for gender and they give you a very huge set of options to choose from. So in the gender field here, if you start typing, you will get a bunch of suggestions, and they have really a very extensive list of options there that cover a variety of gender identities. And they also allow you to pick more than one. And the way they ask this question and the way they provide me with options to answer this question makes me feel seen, makes me feel understood, makes me feel like, oh, okay, these people are aware of how gender works. So they are actually thinking about this stuff. And I am more likely actually to fill out that field and to use their pronoun in a certain sense. And same thing goes for the question about pronouns. Here, I think that the really nice things is that they actually tell you how that information is going to be used. In this case, they tell you that your pronoun is public. So they give you the opportunity to make an informed choice about whether you want to give out or not that very sensitive information about your identity. Let's now just say a very brief word about technology. I'm not gonna say anything really technical, because also as a designer, you might come with a tech background, but you might also not be that technical. You might come from a totally different type of background and a different focus, which is more, on humans rather than machines. But it's important for us working in design to have at least an understanding of the implications that come with choosing certain technologies. For example, with artificial intelligence, we have to deal with the bias that the creators of that artificial intelligence put into it, basically. Because artificial intelligence is all about trying to teach machines to mimic the process of problem solving and decision making that humans do. The thing is that if you teach them to do it the way you do it, you're gonna also teach that machine the bias that you have. And there have been cases in which for facial recognition technology, for example, it turned out that because those who built it, training on data from white dudes, then the facial recognition technology actually has trouble understanding and reading and recognizing the face of people of color, of women, etc. One example that I also have mentioned in one of the articles that I have published on the CareerFoundry blog is that of an app called Giggle. It's a social application for girls. That's what their creator, marketed as. And nothing wrong with creating a safe space for people with a certain identity to be with themselves and, find support, find friends and help in a safe environment. The problem comes when you decide that identity verification is going to be done through facial recognition technology that works not perfectly, but quite well with people who are assigned female at birth, but does not work that well with trans women, for example. So this application, as soon as they published it, they received quite a bit of a backlash. Many people wrote unhappy reviews, and there were articles talking about how can you create such a product when you don't understand actually certain quite important things about how people identify. And the last thing that I want to mention about technology is that bias can also come with voice user interfaces. Not all bad things come with voice user interfaces. Actually, voice assistants allow people who cannot use visual interfaces, graphic user interfaces, or that cannot handle a mouse or a keyboard to access services and content that would be otherwise hard to reach for them. And they're also very good for older people who are not so tech savvy and that find it easier for them to just, talk to a machine rather than learning different ways to interact with it. But they also bring bias, because the moment that Amazon decided Alexa as a female sounding voice, Amazon is iterating on the stereotype that women, so people with a female sounding voice, have a better talent to be assistants because they're more submissive, etc. Also, accents are quite an interesting challenge to solve when it comes to voice user interfaces, because if we hear a voice and we hear an accent, what happens in our brain is that we connect that accent with a certain nationality, for example, sometimes also with a certain socioeconomic status. So that might, bias either in a positive or negative way, because bias can be, attached, can be positive or negative. They can trigger both positive and negative connotation in our mind. And there's also a problem like the other way around, like when the user is speaking to the system. Because if you don't train speech recognition on a diverse enough data sets of voices from different users with different accents and different fluency level in a language, then you will end up having speech recognition that works very well for certain people, but that just does not understand other people. And yeah, this is all a field that is constantly evolving. If it sounds interesting to you, definitely check out how to get into voice user interface design. I think it's a very exciting field to specialize in. And now let's just look at briefly some example of inclusive design principles. Principles are basically rules and considerations that we as designers create so that we can make a statement of our intention of what we want our design to achieve, and then we can use also to align with each other in our team, and then we can reference to whenever we have to make design decisions so that we can make faster, more consistent, better decisions. And while you're defining this design principle, you might as well want to embed inclusive principles into them. And if you want to look at some examples, some of my favorites are for example, the design patterns from the UK government website. I mean, the website itself, I think it's a quite nice website, especially for this kind of like administrative bureaucracy related kind of content. It's very extremely clear, it's super accessible, and still manages, in my opinion, to be aesthetically pleasant and elegant. And it also contains publicly available style guides, components, and patterns that you can reference to if you want to do things like asking people about their ethnicity, asking people about their gender and sex, building fields for collecting information about addresses, names, etc. Another very good example to look at is the Microsoft website. They have very good resources on inclusive design. They focus much on accessibility, a bit less on other aspects of inclusive design, but it's extremely good content there. And this is just one more than I find very nice. These are this is called the Children's Design Guide. It's made by an organization, association that wants to involve children into the design process so that products are better designed for children. And they have just a few principles. So these are not very detailed guidelines, but are more really like just guiding values, we could say. And the first one is everyone can use. So they make a statement about who should be able to use the products that are designed for children, and they put an emphasis on how all children should be served equally well by those who design products for them.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope the webinar snippet was very valuable for you. Let us know in the comments what was your main takeaway and why. If you want to see more live events like this, check out our website or subscribe to our YouTube channel for more weekly videos like this. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.